So, as a creator of this kind of community in place with anonymity and difficult conversations, what do you think about this touchy three words that people have been tossing around and politicizing, I would say, but is at the core of the founding of this country, which is the freedom of speech? How do you think about the freedom of speech, of this particular kind of freedom of expression? And do you think it's a fundamental human right? How do you define it to yourself when you're thinking about it? I went down, especially preparing for this conversation, down a rabbit hole of like just how unclear it is philosophically what is meant by this kind of freedom. It's not as easy as people think, but it's interesting, pragmatically speaking, to hear how you think about it in the context of Librex.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? There's a lot there. So I come from the background of being a math major. Maybe it's important to start with that.
Yeah.
And I found myself in the middle of this question of freedom of speech. One of the wonderful things is that the Librex community is filled with PhDs and governance majors who have taught me a ton about this sort of thing. And I'm still learning. I'm still growing. I'm still probably going to modify my perspective to some degree. Hopefully, don't worry. I imagine I'll always support free discourse.
Like learning, how to speak about stuff is critical here, because it's like I'm learning that this is like a minefield of conversations. Because the moment you say, like, even saying freedom of speech is a complicated concept, people will be like, "Oh, we spotted a communist."
Yeah.
Like they'll say, "There's nothing complicated about freedom. Freedom is freedom, bro." It is complicated. First of all, if you talk about there's different definitions of freedom of speech. If you want to go constitution, if you want to talk about the United States specifically and what's legal, it's actually not as exciting and not as beautiful as people think of.
Complicated.
It's complicated. I think there's ideals behind it that we want to see. What does that actually materialize itself in a digital world where we're trying to communicate in ways that allows for difficult conversations, and also at the same time doesn't result in the silencing of voices, not through like censorship, but through like just assholes being rude.
Spam.
So it could be just bots.
Racism. Going back to the name of the app, Librex.
Yes.
Libre, free. X was a portmanteau for free exchange. And the free exchange of what? My purpose was to create as much intercommunication of ideas, be them repugnant or otherwise, as possible. And of course, to do that within legal bounds, and to do that without causing anyone to be harassed or doxxed. So to keep things focused on the ideas, not the people. And then no BS crap, stuff. And so to me, the easiest way to moderate around that, because as you said, figuring out what is hateful and what is hate speech is really hard, was to say no sweeping statements against core identity groups. And that seems to work on the whole pretty well, to be pretty light touch. And
hard to do though.
It's difficult.
Because we like to generalize, we humans.
It's difficult, but what it comes down to is be specific.
Yeah.
And when you think about what are sweeping statements against core identity groups, right? Oftentimes these are sort of hackneyed subjects. These are things that have been broached and we've heard them before. They don't really lead anywhere productive.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes under this principle of be specific in the ideas you're discussing.
So even for like positive and humorous stuff, you try to avoid generalizations
against core identity groups.
Core identity groups. Sorry, what are core identity groups?
We're talking, race, religion.
Okay. Got it. Even positive stuff?
Well, against, negative.
Oh, against. Okay.
Very, very, we've learned to be very specific. Very few words, but the community gets it,
Yeah, they get it. I mean, this is the thing. The trouble with rules is as the community grows, they'll figure out ways to manipulate the rules.
Absolutely. It's human nature. It's creativity.
Yeah.
Something beautiful about it, of course. Unlike
From an evolutionary perspective, yes.
yeah, the fact that people are so creative and so looking to, and because people are genuinely interested in figuring out these things about social media. And so they'll 100% like see like, where's the edge? And I mean, part of that's maintaining some level of vagueness in your rule set,
Yeah.
which has its own set of questions and something we could think about. And I'm not implying I have all the answers, but there is something really interesting about people being so engaged that they're looking to figure out where are those edges and what does that mean? What does that edge mean? You know?
Well, so one of the things I'm kind of thinking about, like from an individual user of Librex or an individual user of the internet, I think about like that one person that is on Reddit saying hateful stuff or positive stuff, doesn't matter, or funny stuff. One of the things I think about is the trajectory of that individual through life and how social media can help that person become the best version of themselves. I don't mean from like an Orwellian sense, like educate them properly or something. I just mean like I believe we're all fundamentally good. And I also believe we all have the capacity to create some amazing stuff in this world, whether that's ideas or art or engineering, all those kinds of things, just to be amazing people. And I kind of think about like, a lot of social media mechanisms bring out the worst in us. And I try to think like, in the long term, how can the social media or how can a website, how can a tool that you create can make the best, like you take a trajectory that makes you a better and like the best version of yourself. So I think about that because like, Twitter can really take you down some dark trajectories. I've seen people just not being the best version of themselves. Forget the cancel culture and all that kind of stuff. It's just like they're not developing intellectually in the way that's going to make the best version of themselves. I think Reddit, I'm not sure what I think about Reddit yet. Because one positive side is all the shit posting on Reddit could be just like a release valve for some stress in life, and you almost have like a parallel life where in meat space you might be actually becoming successful and so on and growing and so on, but you just need sometimes to be angry at somebody. But I tend to not think that's possible. I think if you're shit posting, you're probably not spending your time the best way you could. I don't know. I'm torn on that. But do you think about that with Librex of creating a trajectory for the Yale, for the Dartmouth, for the students to where they grow intellectually?
One thing that I think about a lot is how do you incentivize positive content creation? How do you incentivize
Well put. Yeah.
really intellectual content creation? It's something that, frankly, I think about every single day. And I think there are ways that, one thing that's great about humans is that they can be incentivized, right? And I think there are ways that you can incentivize people to make the right kind of content, if that's your goal.
So you think such mechanisms exist for such incentivization?
I do. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag,
sure,
so to speak.
So you have already concrete ideas in your mind. And
I have about 3 concrete ideas that I'm very, very optimistic about.
Yeah.
And
you don't even need to share them. The fact, I understand totally, but like the fact that you have them, that's really good. Because I feel like sometimes the downfall of the social media is that there's literally not even a thinking or a discussion about the incentivization of positive long-term content creation. I mean, Twitter, I really was excited about this when they said like, when Jack has talked about like creating healthy conversations.
Yeah, he does seem to care. I've listened to him. I mean, he has a very particular way of saying things, but you get the impression that he's someone who actually cares about these things within the limits of his power.
Yeah. And that's the question, the limits of the power. Librex is growing not just in the number of communities, but also in the way you're incentivizing positive conversations, like coupled with the moderation and so on. So you think there's a lot of innovation to be had in that area?
I think there's a tremendous amount. I think when you think about the reasons people post, fundamentally, people want to make a positive impact on their community to some degree. Now, there'll always be bad actors, and part of the benefit of sort of our moderation structure is that we can limit some of those bad actors, no body counts, no brigading. At the same time, the more you incentivize a certain type of behavior, the better it's going to be. And we don't see it as our role as the platform to force the community in a direction. And frankly, I don't think it would be good for anyone, the community or the conversations, if we forced a specific type of conversation. We just need to make the tools to allow people to be good, and to incentivize good behavior.
Yeah, I believe that. Like, if you will not need to censor if you allow people at scale to be good. The good will overpower the assholes.
That's my fundamental belief. I'm very optimistic about that.